Gracie Zeller flinched as the auction block creaked beneath her worn leather boots, the jeers of the crowd cutting deeper than the chilly October wind that swept through Willow Creek, Wyoming territory. 1876. Her auburn hair, hastily pinned beneath a shabby bonnet, couldn't hide the fire in her eyes, a fire that refused to be extinguished despite the humiliation of being sold off to pay her late father's debts. "What'll you give for this one, gentlemen?" The auctioneer bellowed, his voice thick with whiskey and contempt. "Might not be much to look at, but she can cook, clean, and probably warm your bed if you're desperate enough." The crowd erupted in laughter, men elbowing each other and making crude gestures that made Gracie's stomach turn. $5, someone shouted from the back. $3 and a bottle of whiskey. Another voice called. Gracie bit her lip until she tasted blood, determined not to let them see her cry. 3 weeks ago, she'd been the respected daughter of a shopkeeper. Now, after his sudden death and the discovery of his gambling debts, she was property to be sold to the highest bidder. The sheriff had given her a choice, the auction block or debtor's prison. Some choice. "Come now, gentlemen," the auctioneer prodded. "Surely this filly's worth more than that. She's got all her teeth, and look at those capable hands. Who'll give me $10? More laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone threw a rotten apple that landed with a splat at her feet. Gracie raised her chin higher, even as tears threatened to spill. Her father might have gambled away everything they had, but he couldn't take her dignity. Only she could surrender that. "This is disgraceful," a deep voice cut through the mockery. The crowd parted as a tall figure stepped forward. Owen Grayson, owner of the largest cattle ranch outside of town, removed his hat and approached the auction block. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his blue eyes were clear and steady as they met Gracie's. $100, he announced, silencing the crowd. The auctioneer blinked in surprise. "Did you say $100, Mr. Grayson?" "I did." Grayson's gaze swept over the assembled townsfolk, his expression hardening. "And I'll say something else. This woman is worth more than all of you put together." Gracie's breath caught in her throat. She'd seen Owen Grayson in town occasionally, had even served him at her father's general store, but they'd never exchanged more than polite greetings. What game was he playing? "Sold," the auctioneer declared, slamming down his gavel before anyone could protest. "To Mr. Owen Grayson for $100. As Grayson approached to help her down from the platform, Gracie steeled herself. Whatever his intentions, she wouldn't go meekly to another form of slavery. "Don't touch me," she whispered fiercely as he offered his hand. He withdrew it immediately but remained close. "Miss Zeller, I mean you no harm. I'm offering you a job, not ownership." "A job?" Confusion mingled with suspicion as she searched his face for deceit. "My housekeeper left 2 weeks ago to marry a man in Cheyenne. The house is in disarray, and I've got a dozen ranch hands who need feeding." His voice was low, meant only for her ears. "It's honest work with fair pay and your own quarters. You can leave any time you choose." Gracie hesitated. "Why would you help me?" A shadow passed over his features. "Because I know what it's like to be judged unfairly for circumstances beyond your control." He glanced at the dispersing crowd, many of whom were grumbling about his interference. "Do you accept?" With the sheriff waiting to collect the auction money and no family to turn to, Gracie had few options. Yet something in Grayson's steady gaze made her believe he was sincere. "I accept," she said finally, stepping down from the platform without taking his hand. As they walked away from the town square, whispers followed them like snakes in the grass. "Poor Grayson, always picking up strays. He'll regret it when she robs him blind. Probably thinks he's getting more than a housekeeper for his $100. Grayson's jaw tightened, but he said nothing until they reached his wagon. He helped her climb up, then walked around to take the reins. "I apologize for this town's behavior," he said as they pulled away. "Your father was well respected until everyone discovered he was a gambling addict who mortgaged our lives away," Gracie finished bitterly. "You don't need to sugarcoat it, Mr. Grayson. I've had 3 weeks to accept the truth." He nodded, respecting her directness. The Rocking G is about an hour's ride. It's not luxurious, but it's comfortable enough. They fell into silence as the wagon rumbled out of town. Gracie watched Willow Creek recede into the distance, the only home she'd known for all her 22 years. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also escape from the pitying glances and cruel whispers. She studied Grayson from the corner of her eye. He was older than her, perhaps 30 or 32, with strong, sun-bronzed hands that handled the reins with easy confidence. His profile was sharp, almost severe, but there was a gentleness in how he slowed the wagon over rough patches of road. "Why did you really bid for me?" she asked suddenly. He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "My mother was auctioned off like that once in Georgia after my father died. I was 10. I vowed if I ever saw such a thing again, I'd stop it if I could." The simple honesty of his answer silenced her. For the first time since her father's death, Gracie felt something other than despair, a tiny spark of hope that perhaps not everyone in the world was cruel or indifferent. The Rocking G Ranch appeared as they crested a hill, a sprawling main house with a wide porch, surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals. In the distance, cattle dotted the rolling grassland, and the mountains provided a majestic backdrop against the late afternoon sky. "It's beautiful," Gracie murmured despite herself. Grayson's expression softened slightly. "It's home." As they pulled up to the house, an older man with graying hair emerged from the barn. "Jasper," Grayson called, "this is Miss Gracie Zeller. She'll be taking over as housekeeper." Jasper tipped his hat respectfully. "Madam, welcome to the Rocking G." "Thank you," Gracie replied, suddenly uncertain now that she was actually here. Grayson helped her down from the wagon. "Jasper's my foreman. Been with me since I started with just 50 acres and a dozen cattle. He'll show you around while I take care of the horses." Jasper led her toward the house, chatting amiably about the ranch and its routines. Gracie half listened, her mind still processing the swift change in her circumstances. This morning, she'd awakened in a cell at the back of the sheriff's office. Now she was about to become housekeeper for one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory. The house was indeed in disarray, not filthy, but showing clear signs of neglect. Dishes were stacked in the kitchen sink, dust gathered on surfaces, and laundry sat in piles waiting to be washed. "Boss has been trying to manage with help from the ranch hands, but they're cowboys, not housekeepers," Jasper explained with a chuckle. "Mrs. Holloway ran this place like clockwork for 5 years before she left. Big shoes to fill." "I'm a hard worker," Gracie said defensively. Jasper's eyes crinkled kindly. "Never doubted it, Miss Zeller. Boss wouldn't have brought you here otherwise. He's a good judge of character." He showed her to a small but pleasant bedroom off the kitchen. "This is your room. Private entrance there." He pointed to a door that led outside. "Boss is upstairs. Ranch hands stay in the bunkhouse so you won't be bothered." After Jasper left, Gracie sat on the narrow bed, finally allowing herself a moment to process everything. Tears came then, not of despair, but of relief mingled with lingering shame. The memory of standing on that auction block while people laughed and jeered would haunt her for a long time. A soft knock at her door made her hastily wipe away her tears. Grayson stood in the doorway, holding a small trunk. "Your belongings," he explained. "The sheriff gave them to me before we left town. Thank you." Her voice sounded small even to her own ears. He hesitated, then set the trunk inside her room. "Supper's usually at 6. The men eat in the bunkhouse, but tonight I thought you might prefer to eat here in the kitchen. Give yourself time to settle in." His consideration surprised her. "That would be best," he nodded, turning to leave. "Mr. Grayson," she called after him. When he looked back, she forced herself to meet his eyes. "I intend to repay you. The $100. It might take time, but there's nothing to repay," he interrupted quietly. "Consider it an advance against your wages if it makes you feel better. But I don't want your money, Miss Zeller." He paused. "What I would appreciate is if you'd call me Owen. Mr. Grayson makes me feel like my father." "Then you must call me Gracie," she replied, the formality between them feeling suddenly unnecessary after the day's events. "Gracie," he repeated with a slight nod. "Welcome to the Rocking G. I hope you'll find some peace here." After he left, Gracie opened her trunk, touching the few possessions she'd managed to keep: her mother's hand mirror, a worn Bible, a quilt she'd made herself, and several plain dresses. At the bottom lay her most treasured possession, a small wooden box containing her mother's cameo brooch, the only thing of value she'd hidden from the creditors. As she unpacked, she listened to the sounds of the ranch settling into evening, men calling to each other as they returned from the range, horses nickering, the distant lowing of cattle. Different from the town sounds she was accustomed to, but not unpleasant. Later, she ventured to the kitchen and found bread, cheese, and cold meat left for her. A note in a strong, slanting hand read simply, "Take what you need. Rest tonight. We'll talk more tomorrow. OG." Gracie ate sparingly, her appetite diminished by the day's tumult. Afterward, she explored the kitchen, taking inventory of supplies and making mental notes of what needed to be done. Work had always been her refuge from worry, and having tasks to focus on helped calm her mind. When exhaustion finally overcame her, she returned to her room, changed into her nightgown, and slipped beneath the quilt. The bed was more comfortable than any she'd slept in for weeks. Outside her window, coyotes called in the distance, and the vast Wyoming sky sparkled with stars. For the first time since her father's death, Gracie fell asleep without crying. Dawn broke crisp and clear, rousing Gracie from the deepest sleep she'd had in weeks. For a moment, disorientation gripped her as she stared at unfamiliar walls, before yesterday's events came rushing back. She rose quickly, determined to prove her worth from the very first day. By the time the ranch hands began stirring in the bunkhouse, she had a fire roaring in the kitchen stove, coffee brewing, and biscuit dough mixed. She found bacon and eggs in the pantry and set about preparing a hearty breakfast, falling easily into the familiar rhythms of cooking. Owen entered the kitchen just as she was removing the first batch of biscuits from the oven, the aroma filling the room with warmth. "Good morning," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "You didn't need to start so early." Gracie straightened, brushing flour from her apron. "I'm an early riser by habit. Besides, men need a proper breakfast before working." He poured himself coffee, watching as she efficiently managed several tasks at once. "I should warn you, the men have been surviving on their own cooking. They'll think they've died and gone to heaven when they smell these biscuits." As if on cue, Jasper appeared at the back door, inhaling appreciatively. "Is that fresh biscuits I smell, Miss Zeller?" "It is indeed," she confirmed. "There's coffee ready too, Mr. Jasper." "Just Jasper, please." He accepted a cup gratefully. "The boys are finishing up with the morning chores. They'll be mighty pleased to see real food instead of cookies flapjacks. Man can handle a branding iron better than a spatula." Owen smiled slightly. "That's charitable, Jasper. Last time Cookie made flapjacks, we used them to repair a hole in the barn roof." The joke surprised a laugh out of Gracie, a sound she hadn't made in weeks. Owen's eyes caught hers, something warm and approving in his gaze that made her quickly look away. Soon the kitchen filled with ranch hands, 7 men of varying ages who removed their hats and introduced themselves politely, though Gracie caught their curious glances. News traveled fast in Wyoming territory. They undoubtedly knew exactly who she was and how she'd come to be here. Yet to her surprise, they treated her with nothing but respect, complimenting her cooking enthusiastically. As they ate, they talked of ranch business fences needing repair, a mare about to foal, cattle to be moved to the south pasture, normal conversation that made no reference to her circumstances. After breakfast, the men filed out to begin their day's work. Owen lingered, helping her clear the table despite her protests. "You cook as well as my mother did," he said, carrying dishes to the wash basin. "The men are already planning to propose marriage." Gracie felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I hope you'll discourage such notions, Mr. Owen. I'm here to work, not to find a husband." He studied her for a moment. "Of course, that wasn't my implication." He set down the plates. "I need to ride out with the men, but I wanted to make sure you have everything you need. The pantry should be well stocked, but I can bring anything from town." "Actually," Gracie said, "I was hoping you might show me around the ranch first. If I'm to keep house properly, I should know the layout." Owen nodded. "I can spare an hour. Let me tell Jasper to go ahead with the others." The tour revealed a well-run operation much larger than Gracie had initially realized. Beyond the main house and bunkhouse lay a blacksmith's forge, a smokehouse, root cellar, barn, and several corrals. Further out stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed, and beyond that, open range extending toward distant mountains. "How much land do you have?" she asked as they walked. "About 20,000 acres, Owen replied. "Started with 50 when I came here after the war. Worked for other ranchers, saved every penny, bought more land when I could." "You built all this yourself?" Gracie was impressed despite herself. A shadow crossed his face. "Not entirely by myself. My brother Daniel was with me at first. We had plans to build the biggest ranch in the territory." The past tense told her everything. "What happened to him?" "Cattle rustlers," Owen said simply. 8 years ago. He was bringing a herd back from Cheyenne when they ambushed him and his men. By the time I found them, it was too late." "I'm sorry," Gracie said softly, understanding now some of the sorrow she occasionally glimpsed in his eyes. They walked in silence for a few moments before Owen spoke again. "After Daniel died, I considered selling everything and moving on. But this land," he gestured to the panorama around them, "it gets in your blood, becomes part of you." "I understand that," Gracie said. "My father felt that way about Willow Creek. It's why he never left, even when my mother died and the store started failing." She paused. "Though I wish now he'd been less attached to it. Perhaps things would have ended differently." Owen glanced at her. "Do you blame him?" "Yes," she admitted. "And no. He was a good father in many ways, but weak when it came to gambling. After Mother died, it grew worse. I tried to help him stop, but—" She trailed off, the pain still too fresh. "Grief makes people do desperate things," Owen said quietly, searching for anything to fill the void. They had circled back to the house, and Gracie was struck by how easy it had been to talk to him, to share burdens she'd carried alone for so long. "Thank you for showing me around," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "I should get back to work." Owen nodded. "I'll be back for supper." "The men eat at the bunkhouse in the evenings. Cookie handles that disaster, but I usually eat in the house." After he rode off to join his men, Gracie attacked the house with renewed energy, sweeping, scrubbing, and organizing. The physical labor was therapeutic, allowing her to channel her emotions into productive work. By mid-afternoon, the main rooms were transformed, floors gleaming, furniture polished, windows sparkling in the autumn sunlight. In the kitchen, she found enough supplies to bake bread and prepare a hearty stew for supper. As she worked, her mind kept returning to Owen, his kindness at the auction, his matter-of-fact acceptance of her situation, the quiet strength he projected. He wasn't what she'd expected from a wealthy rancher. There was no arrogance in him, only a straightforward dignity and a hint of sadness that matched her own. When Owen returned that evening, he paused in the doorway, surveying the transformed house with evident surprise. "You've worked miracles," he said, removing his hat and coat. "I'd forgotten the floor was actually wood under all that dirt." Gracie smiled, pleased by his reaction. "Just needed some elbow grease, though I'll need to talk to you about supplies, soap, candles, and such." "Whatever you need," he agreed, washing up at the basin she'd prepared. "Just make a list." Over supper, Owen asked thoughtful questions about her life before her father's death, her education, 8 years of schooling plus her mother's teachings, her interests reading, quilting, and gardening, her experiences helping in her father's store. He listened attentively to her answers, treating her opinions with respect rather than condescension. In turn, Gracie learned more about the ranch and Owen's plans for expanding his breeding stock with higher quality bulls he planned to purchase in the spring. "Most ranchers around here are satisfied with quantity over quality," he explained. "But I believe the future lies in breeding better cattle, hardier animals that fetch higher prices." "That sounds wise," Gracie said. "My father always said a merchant should sell what people need, not just what they think they want." "Your father was right about that, at least." Owen set down his fork. "Gracie, there's something I should tell you. The reason I was in town yesterday, I was actually coming to see you." Surprise made her set down her coffee cup. "Me? Why?" "Jasper's wife, Sarah, is friends with the sheriff's wife. She told him about your situation." He looked uncomfortable. "I didn't know about the auction until I arrived in town. I'd planned to offer you the housekeeper position privately." "So it wasn't just coincidence," Gracie said slowly. "You actually came to Willow Creek intending to help me." He nodded. "Sarah said you were educated and capable, but fallen on hard times through no fault of your own. The timing was fortunate since Mrs. Holloway had just left." "And the $100, was that part of your plan too?" "No," Owen admitted. "That was impulse. I couldn't stomach what was happening." Gracie studied him, trying to reconcile this information with her perceptions. "Why tell me this now?" "Because I want no misunderstandings between us," he said simply. "You deserve honesty after everything you've endured." His directness was refreshing after weeks of whispers and averted gazes in town. "Thank you for telling me, and for what you did, regardless of your reasons." Later, as she prepared for bed, Gracie reflected on her changed circumstances. Just 2 days ago, she'd faced a future of servitude or worse. Now she had meaningful work, a comfortable place to live, and an employer who treated her with respect. It wasn't the life she'd envisioned for herself, but perhaps it could become something worthwhile. The next weeks fell into a rhythm. Gracie rose each morning before dawn to prepare breakfast for the men, spent her days cleaning, cooking, and gradually transforming the bachelor-run ranch house into a true home. She planted herbs in pots for the kitchen windowsill, mended linens, and organized the pantry with efficient precision. Owen was often gone from sunrise to sunset, particularly as November brought the first snows and cattle needed extra attention. But they shared supper most evenings, their conversations growing more comfortable and wide-ranging. He brought her books from his small library: history, poetry, even novels that his mother had loved, and seemed genuinely interested in her opinions. Occasionally, when work allowed, he showed her more of the ranch, teaching her to ride one of the gentler mares so she could accompany him farther afield. Gracie, who'd rarely ridden before, found unexpected joy in these excursions, in the freedom of galloping across open meadows with the wind in her hair. On one such ride in early December, they stopped at a high ridge overlooking a valley where a small herd of wild horses grazed, their breath visible in the cold air. "They're beautiful," Gracie said, watching a black stallion prance proudly around his mares. "Free," Owen corrected, something wistful in his voice. "That's what makes them beautiful." She glanced at him curiously. "Would you capture them if you could?" "No," he shook his head. "Some things should remain wild." Gracie pulled her coat tighter against the chill. "Is that why you've never married?" To remain free, the question slipped out before she could reconsider its propriety. To her relief, Owen didn't seem offended. "Partly," he acknowledged, "though it's more that I never found someone who made me willing to be captured." He smiled slightly. "What about you? No young man in Willow Creek caught your eye." "There was someone once," Gracie admitted. "Thomas Erickson, the banker's son. We courted for almost a year." "What happened?" "Father's gambling debts began to surface. Suddenly, I wasn't such a desirable match." The old hurt was still there, but duller now. "Thomas married Abigail Porter last spring. She brought a substantial dowry to the marriage." "His loss," Owen said simply. They rode in companionable silence back to the ranch, snow beginning to fall in lazy flakes that caught in Gracie's eyelashes and melted on her cheeks. For the first time in months, she felt something like contentment. That evening, as they sat before the fire after supper, Owen mentioned plans for the upcoming Christmas holiday. "The men usually have a celebration in the bunkhouse on Christmas Eve," he explained. "Then most ride into town for Christmas Day if the weather allows. Those with families nearby visit them." "And you?" Gracie asked. "Do you have family to visit?" He shook his head. "Just the ranch. I usually spend the day quietly." The thought of him alone on Christmas while everyone else celebrated made Gracie inexplicably sad. "We could have a proper Christmas dinner here," she suggested. "For any men who stay and us. I make excellent mince pies." Owen looked surprised, then pleased. "I'd like that. It's been years since I've had a real Christmas dinner." As December progressed, Gracie threw herself into preparations for the holiday. She baked cookies and fruit cakes, fashioned simple decorations from pine boughs and red berries, and even convinced Jasper to bring in a small pine tree that she set up in the sitting room. "Smells like Christmas in here," Owen commented one evening, returning from a long day checking fences in the north pasture. Snow dusted his shoulders and hat, and his cheeks were ruddy from the cold. "That's the intention," Gracie replied, hanging the last ornament, a star she'd crafted from scraps of tin. "I hope you don't mind. I might have gotten carried away." "Not at all." He removed his coat, hanging it by the door. "My mother used to decorate like this. Daniel and I would help her gather greenery from the woods behind our farm in Missouri." It was rare for Owen to mention his childhood, and Gracie treasured these glimpses into his past. "Was Christmas a happy time for your family?" "Very." His eyes softened with memory. "Father would read the Christmas story from the Bible, and Mother always managed some small gift for each of us, even in lean years. The war changed everything, of course." Gracie knew he'd fought for the Union, though he rarely spoke of it. "You were very young." 18 when I enlisted." Daniel was 20. He stared into the fire. "Too young to understand what we were walking into, but old enough to carry the scars afterward." Impulsively, Gracie touched his arm. "I'm glad you survived to build all this." He covered her hand with his own for a brief moment. "So am I." The brief contact sent warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the crackling fire. Flustered, she busied herself straightening ornaments that didn't need straightening. I should check on supper, she said, retreating to the kitchen where she could compose herself. These moments had been happening more frequently, small touches, glances that lingered, conversations that seemed to carry deeper currents beneath the surface. Gracie wasn't naive. She recognized the growing attraction between them. But she was his employee, dependent on his goodwill for her livelihood. Any romantic entanglement would be complicated at best, disastrous at worst. Besides, she reminded herself firmly, there was no indication that Owen saw her as anything but a capable housekeeper and perhaps a friend. His kindness was simply his nature, not special treatment. Yet later that night, alone in her room, she couldn't help remembering the warmth of his hand over hers, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how he truly listened when she spoke. Dangerous thoughts for a woman in her position, but impossible to banish entirely. Christmas Eve arrived with a fresh blanket of snow and temperatures cold enough to freeze breath into crystalline clouds. The bunkhouse celebration was in full swing by evening accordion music, laughter, and singing drifting across the yard. Jasper had invited Gracie and Owen to join them, but she declined, knowing her presence might dampen the men's revelry. Instead, she prepared a special supper for herself, an Owen roast duck with apple stuffing, potatoes, and fresh bread. She'd even splurged on ingredients for her mother's recipe for Christmas pudding, rich with dried fruits and spices. Owen arrived just as she was setting the table, carrying a bottle of wine and a small wrapped package. "Merry Christmas," he said, setting both on the table. "The wine is from California. I've been saving it for a special occasion." Gracie eyed the package curiously. "What's that?" "A gift," he replied, looking suddenly uncertain. "It's nothing elaborate. I have something for you too," she interrupted, hurrying to retrieve the parcel hidden in her room. It was a scarf she'd knitted in the evenings, using wool from the ranch's own sheep, dyed a deep blue that she thought would match his eyes. They exchanged gifts somewhat awkwardly, each insisting the other open theirs first. Finally, Owen relented, carefully unwrapping the scarf. "You made this?" he asked, running his fingers over the soft wool. Gracie nodded. "I noticed your old one was practically in tatters. This should be warmer." He wrapped it around his neck immediately. "It's perfect, thank you." "Now yours," he urged, pushing the small package toward her. Gracie unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small wooden box with a delicately carved lid depicting a meadow of wildflowers. Opening it, she gasped at the sight of a beautiful silver hair comb adorned with tiny pearl inlays. "Owen, it's exquisite," she breathed. "But too expensive. I can't accept. It was my mother's," he said quietly. "One of the few things I have left of hers. I think she would have wanted you to have it." The significance of such a gift left Gracie speechless. This wasn't a trinket bought from a store, it was a family heirloom, a piece of his past that he was entrusting to her. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed. "Say you'll wear it," he suggested, his voice gentle. "It's meant to be used, not hidden away in my trunk." Gracie touched the comb reverently. "I will, thank you." They shared the Christmas Eve meal by candlelight, the wine adding a warm glow to the occasion. Outside, snow fell in a silent curtain, muffling all sounds except the occasional burst of laughter from the bunkhouse and the popping of logs in the fireplace. After dinner, they moved to the sitting room where Gracie had arranged comfortable chairs near the tree. The small space, warmed by the fire and scented with pine, felt intimate and festive. "This is the nicest Christmas Eve I've had in years," Owen said, refilling their wine glasses. "For me too," Gracie admitted. Even before Father died, holidays had become strained. He was usually either gambling or brooding about his losses. "It couldn't have been easy for you." No, she stared into her wine, but tonight makes up for many difficult ones. Owen set down his glass and moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. Gracie, there's something I need to say. The seriousness in his tone made her heart quicken. What is it? These past weeks, having you here, he seemed to struggle for words, unusual for a man typically so articulate. You've brought something back to this house that's been missing since my brother died. Life. Warmth. I've only done my job, she said softly. No. He shook his head firmly. It's more than that. You've made this place a home again, made me remember there's more to living than just work and obligation. Gracie set down her own glass, her hand suddenly unsteady. Owen, I know your circumstances brought you here, he continued. I know you might have chosen a different path if you'd had the chance, but I can't help hoping that you might consider staying, not just as my housekeeper, but because you want to be here, with me. The implications of his words hung in the air between them. Gracie searched his face, finding earnest hope and vulnerability there, along with something deeper that made her breath catch. Are you asking? I'm asking if you could ever see me as more than your employer, he said directly. If there might be a chance for us to build something together. Gracie's mind whirled with conflicting emotions, surprise, joy, and a persistent doubt that whispered she was merely convenient, a woman already in his home, already part of his daily life. Why me? She asked, needing to know. You could have any woman in the territory, someone without my history. Owen's expression softened. Because you stood on that auction block with your head high, refusing to be broken by circumstances that would have shattered most people. Because you work harder than anyone I've ever known, not for praise but because it's simply who you are. Because when you smile, really smile, not the polite one you use when you're being careful, it lights up every corner of this house. He took her hand, his touch gentle but certain. And because when I'm with you, I feel like I've finally found what I've been looking for, even when I didn't know I was searching. Tears welled in Gracie's eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming emotion. In those words, she heard not pity or convenience, but genuine admiration and affection. I've been afraid to acknowledge what I feel, she confessed. Afraid it would complicate everything, that I'd end up back where I started alone and vulnerable. You never have to be afraid with me, Owen promised. Whatever happens between us, you'll always have a place here, always be respected. I give you my word. Gracie believed him. In the months she'd known him, Owen Grayson had proven himself a man of integrity, someone whose word was unbreakable. I've come to care for you deeply, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. More than I thought possible after everything that happened. The hope in his eyes kindled into joy. Then may I kiss you, Gracie Zeller, because I've been wanting to since that day on the ridge with the wild horses. She nodded, her heart pounding as he leaned forward. His lips met hers with tender restraint, a question more than a demand. Gracie answered by sliding her hand to his shoulder, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened into something that sent warmth coursing through her veins. When they finally parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers. Merry Christmas, Gracie. She smiled, feeling truly happy for the first time in longer than she could remember. Merry Christmas, Owen. Christmas Day dawned bright and clear, sunlight sparkling off fresh snow that transformed the ranch into a glistening wonderland. Gracie woke early, her mind immediately returning to the previous evening Owen's words. Their kiss, the promise of something precious unfolding between them. They'd parted reluctantly, both aware that this new understanding needed time and care to develop properly. Owen had kissed her hand before leaving for his room upstairs, his eyes conveying all the things left unsaid between them. Now, as Gracie prepared breakfast, She felt a lightness in her spirit that had been absent for months. The future, which had seemed so bleak that day on the auction block, now held possibilities she'd never dared imagine. Owen joined her in the kitchen just as she was removing biscuits from the oven. His hair still damp from washing, the blue scarf she'd made him draped casually around his neck. "Morning," he said, his smile warming her more effectively than the stove. "Merry Christmas," she replied, suddenly shy in the light of day. He moved closer, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in ages," she admitted. "Good." He kissed her forehead lightly. "Because I barely slept at all, thinking about you." They shared a quiet breakfast, their conversation occasionally punctuated by comfortable silences and stolen glances. Afterward, Owen helped with the dishes, their movements around the kitchen already harmonized from weeks of shared meals. "Most of the men rode into town at dawn," he told her. "Jasper and a few others stayed behind to tend the essential chores, but they'll join us for dinner later." The remainder of the morning passed in pleasant domesticity as they prepared the Christmas feast together. Owen proved surprisingly capable in the kitchen, explaining that he'd learned to cook during cattle drives when the regular cook had fallen ill. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Grayson," Gracie teased as he expertly carved the goose she'd roasted. "I hope to keep surprising you for years to come, Miss Zeller," he replied, his voice carrying a promise that made her cheeks flush. Jasper and 3 other ranch hands joined them for the midday meal, their presence a welcome buffer as Gracie and Owen navigated the new dimensions of their relationship. The men were effusive in their praise of the food, especially Jasper, who declared it the finest Christmas dinner he'd had since leaving his mother's table 30 years earlier. After the meal, they gathered in the sitting room where Owen read the Christmas story from his mother's Bible, his deep voice giving weight and meaning to the familiar words. Later, Jasper produced a fiddle and played traditional carols while they sang along, filling the house with music and laughter. As dusk fell, the ranch hands returned to the bunkhouse, leaving Gracie and Owen alone once more. They sat before the fire, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder as they watched flames dance over the logs. "I've been thinking," Owen said after a while, "about what happens next." Gracie lifted her head to look at him. "And what conclusion did you reach?" "That I want to do this properly." He took her hand. "Court you as you deserve to be courted. No rushing, no pressure. I want to give you time to be certain of your feelings." His consideration touched her deeply. "And if I'm already certain," a smile tugged at his lips, "even so. There will be talk in town when people learn about us. I want no one, not even you, to doubt that this is real, not convenience or obligation." Gracie nodded, understanding his reasoning. The gossips of Willow Creek would indeed have a field day with news that Owen Grayson was courting the woman he'd purchased at auction. Taking time to establish their relationship would help silence those whispers. "Then court me, Owen Grayson," she said softly. "Though I warn you, I'm already quite partial to your attentions." He laughed, pulling her closer. "That's very encouraging news, Miss Zeller." The weeks that followed brought a sweetness to Gracie's life she'd never known before. Owen courted her with thoughtful gestures, wildflowers gathered during his rides, books he thought she'd enjoy, evenings spent teaching her to play chess by the fire. They rode together whenever weather and work permitted, exploring hidden corners of the ranch and occasionally venturing into the foothills beyond. January brought bitter cold and howling blizzards that kept everyone close to home. During one particularly fierce storm, Owen and Gracie spent 3 days essentially trapped in the house while snow piled to the windowsills. They passed the time reading aloud to each other, sharing stories from their childhoods, and planning improvements for the ranch in the coming spring. By February, their relationship had deepened into something both tender and passionate. Their kisses grew more urgent, hands lingering longer with each embrace, but Owen remained respectful of the boundaries Gracie needed. He never pressed for more than she was ready to give, his patience another testament to his character. As winter began to loosen its grip on the land, Owen mentioned a necessary trip to Willow Creek for supplies and to meet with the banker about expanding his breeding program. "Would you come with me?" he asked one evening as they sat in the kitchen after supper. "It's time you faced the town again, on your own terms this time." Anxiety fluttered in Gracie's stomach at the thought of returning to Willow Creek, where her humiliation had been so public. "Do you think that's wise? People will talk. People always talk," Owen said, his expression serious. "But I want them to see us together, to understand that you're not my housekeeper or," he hesitated, "anything less than the woman I intend to marry if she'll have me." Gracie's breath caught. Though their feelings for each other had grown increasingly clear, neither had spoken so directly of marriage before. "Owen, I'm not formally asking yet," he clarified quickly. "Just making my intentions clear. When I do ask, I want it to be perfect." Relief mingled with disappointment. "Then yes, I'll go to town with you." The journey to Willow Creek 2 days later was tense for Gracie, memories of her last departure making her stomach churn with apprehension. Owen, sensing her discomfort, kept up a steady conversation about neutral topics, his hand occasionally covering hers reassuringly. As they approached the town limits, he guided the wagon to a stop. "We can turn back if you're not ready," he offered. Gracie straightened her shoulders, determination replacing fear. "No, I won't let them make me ashamed anymore." Owen's smile was full of pride. "That's my Gracie." Their arrival in town caused exactly the stir Gracie had anticipated. People stopped on the boardwalk to stare as Owen helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingering at her waist longer than strictly necessary. Whispers followed them as they made their way to the general store, now under new ownership. Inside, the proprietor greeted Owen warmly before his gaze fell on Gracie, recognition and surprise registering on his face. "Miss Zeller," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Good to see you looking well." "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," she replied evenly. "I hope your family is in good health." The mundane exchange seemed to break the ice. Owen handed over his supply list, and soon they were discussing prices and delivery dates as if Gracie's presence was the most natural thing in the world. As they moved through town completing their errands, Gracie held her head high, meeting the stares of townsfolk directly. Some turned away in embarrassment, others nodded politely, and a few even offered tentative greetings. By the time they reached the bank, Gracie felt her confidence returning. "I'll be a while here," Owen told her. "Would you like to wait or perhaps visit the milliner's shop? I noticed a sign advertising new spring bonnets." Gracie hesitated. "Actually, there's somewhere I'd like to go if you don't mind. I'll meet you back here in an hour." Concern flickered in his eyes. "Are you sure you want to go alone?" "I need to," she said simply. He nodded, understanding without further explanation. 1 hour then. Gracie made her way down the familiar streets to the small cemetery on the edge of town. Her father's grave was marked with a simple wooden cross, the earth still bare of grass given the recent winter. She stood before it, emotions churning grief, anger, forgiveness, all tangled together like yarn she couldn't untangle. "I was so angry with you," she said finally, her voice barely audible, "for gambling away our security, for leaving me to face the consequences alone." The wind rustled through bare branches overhead, nature's only response. "But I understand better now," she continued. How grief can hollow a person out, make them seek escape any way they can. She thought of Owen, how differently he'd channeled his grief into building something lasting. "I forgive you, Father, and I hope you found peace." A sense of release washed over her, as if setting down a burden she'd carried for too long. She placed the small bunch of dried winter flowers she'd brought on the grave, then turned to leave. Standing a respectful distance away was Owen, his hat in his hands. "I'm sorry," he said as she approached. "I finished early and thought you might want company." "How long have you been there?" "Just a moment," he assured her. "I wouldn't intrude on your privacy." Gracie reached for his hand. "It's not intrusion, not from you." They walked back toward town, his arm around her shoulders providing comfort and strength. As they passed the town square, Gracie's steps faltered at the sight of the auction block where her life had changed so dramatically. Owen followed her gaze. "We can go another way." "No." She squared her shoulders. "I need to face this too." They approached the wooden platform, now empty and unremarkable in the afternoon light. Gracie released Owen's hand and climbed the 3 steps to stand where she'd stood that October day, looking out at the town that had witnessed her humiliation. "I stood here thinking my life was over," she said, her voice steady. "But it was just beginning." Owen moved to the spot where he'd stood in the crowd. "I saw a woman with more courage than anyone in that square," he said, looking up at her. "I still see her every day." Gracie descended the steps and into his arms, no longer caring who might be watching. "Take me home, Owen." The ride back to the ranch was lighter, Gracie's heart unburdened by the ghosts that had haunted her. As they crested the final hill before the ranch came into view, Owen guided the wagon to a stop. "Why are we stopping?" Gracie asked. Owen set the brake and turned to face her fully. "Because this is one of my favorite spots on the whole ranch. You can see everything from here, the house, the barns, the pastures, all the way to the mountains." The view was indeed spectacular in the golden late afternoon light. "It's beautiful," she agreed. "I used to come here when I needed to think," he continued. "After Daniel died, I spent hours sitting right here trying to decide whether to stay or sell everything and move on." He took her hands in his. "This morning, I rode up here at dawn. Sat and thought about my life, about you, about our future, and I realized something important." "What was that?" Gracie asked, her pulse quickening. "That some questions can only be asked in the right place, at the right moment." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "This is that place, Gracie, and this is that moment." He opened the box to reveal a gold ring set with a single perfect diamond that caught the sunlight and scattered it in rainbow fragments. "Gracie Zeller," Owen said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "From the moment you stood on that auction block with your head held high, you've amazed me. Your strength, your kindness, your ability to forge ahead despite every obstacle, they humble me daily. These past months with you have been the happiest of my life." He took the ring from its box. "I love you, Gracie. Will you marry me and make the rocking G our home together?" Tears blurred Gracie's vision, happy ones this time. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Owen, I love you too." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. When they finally parted, both were breathless and smiling. "When?" he asked, stroking her cheek. "Soon," she decided. "I don't want to wait." "Neither do I," he agreed. "Spring, then, when the wildflowers bloom in the meadow." Gracie nodded, imagining the ranch awakening from winter's grip, new life pushing through the soil, a perfect metaphor for their beginning. "Spring it is," she said, kissing him again. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. News of their engagement spread quickly, eliciting congratulations from the ranch hands and a particularly emotional reaction from Jasper, who admitted he'd been hoping for this outcome, since Owen first brought Gracie home. "Never seen the boss happier," he told Gracie one afternoon as they discussed plans for expanding the kitchen garden. "Like he's finally found his North Star." Letters were sent to the few relatives. Gracie had left a cousin in Denver, an aunt in St. Louis inviting them to the wedding. Owen wrote to old Army friends and business associates, though he admitted he didn't expect many to make the journey on such short notice. "It doesn't matter," Gracie assured him. "The people who matter most are already here." They decided on a simple ceremony at the ranch, with the pastor from Willow Creek officiating. As April arrived, bringing warming temperatures and the first green shoots in the meadows, preparations intensified. Gracie ordered fabric from the general store to make her wedding dress, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored silk. In the evenings, she worked on it by lamplight, occasionally looking up to find Owen watching her with such tenderness that it made her heart ache with happiness. The ranch transformed alongside the season, winter's barrenness giving way to renewed vigor as calves were born, fields turned green, and wildflowers began dotting the meadows with splashes of color. A week before the wedding, Owen surprised Gracie by taking her to a previously unvisited corner of the property, where a small cabin nestled in a grove of aspens. "What is this place?" she asked as they dismounted. "It was the original homestead," Owen explained, leading her inside. "Daniel and I lived here when we first came to Wyoming. We built the main house later, once the ranch started turning a profit." The cabin was simple but solidly constructed, with a stone fireplace, 2 rooms, and windows that caught the morning light. Though clearly unused for years, it had been recently cleaned, with fresh curtains at the windows and a vase of wildflowers on the table. "I thought you might like it as a wedding gift," Owen said, watching her reaction carefully. "A place that's just ours, away from the main house when we want privacy. We could fix it up together." Gracie turned slowly, taking in the cozy space and imagining it made truly theirs. Books on shelves, a quilt on the bed, perhaps someday a cradle in the corner. "It's perfect," she said, emotion thickening her voice. "Absolutely perfect." On their wedding day, May 15, 1877, the meadow below the ridge bloomed with wildflowers, blue lupines, orange paintbrush, yellow daisies, and countless others, creating a natural carpet for the simple altar Jasper and the men had constructed. Guests began arriving mid-morning, ranch hands in their Sunday best, Gracie's cousin and aunt who had made the journey after all, several neighboring ranchers, and even a few familiar faces from Willow Creek, including the new store owner and, surprisingly, the sheriff and his wife. Gracie prepared in her room, her aunt helping with her dress and arranging her hair with Owen's mother's silver comb. When she was ready, she stepped outside to find Jasper waiting to escort her, his weather-beaten face uncharacteristically emotional. "Miss Gracie," he said, offering his arm, "you look beautiful. The boss is one lucky man." "Thank you, Jasper," she replied, squeezing his arm gratefully, "for everything." The small gathering stood as Gracie appeared, but she had eyes only for Owen, waiting for her beneath the flowered arch. He wore a new black suit, his blue scarf tucked into the pocket as a gesture that brought tears to her eyes. As she reached him, he took her hands, his eyes shining with love and promise. "You're breathtaking," he whispered. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, their vows exchanged with clear voices that carried across the meadow to the distant mountains. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed her with such gentle passion that several guests wiped away tears. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, a feast prepared by Gracie with help from her aunt and the ranch hands, music provided by Jasper's fiddle and another hand's harmonica. dancing on a wooden platform built specially for the occasion. As night fell, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. Owen pulled Gracie aside, leading her to a quiet spot away from the revelry. "Happy, Mrs. Grayson?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "And you?" "Complete," he said simply, before kissing her again. Later, when the guests had departed or retired to their accommodations, Owen led Gracie not to the main house, but to the cabin. Inside, she found it transformed, a fire crackling in the hearth, candles lighting the space with warm, golden light, fresh linens on the bed, and wildflowers in every corner. "Our beginning," Owen said, closing the door behind them. "Just us." In the tender hours that followed, they discovered each other fully at last, their love expressed in whispered words and gentle touches that grew increasingly passionate as the night deepened around them. Afterward, nestled in Owen's arms with her head on his chest, Gracie marveled at the journey that had brought her here, from the humiliation of the auction block to this perfect happiness. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, stroking her hair. "That sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead us to the best," she replied. "If my father hadn't died, if I hadn't been auctioned off like property, I might never have found you." "I'd have found you somehow," he said with quiet certainty. "Some things are meant to be." Spring bloomed into summer, summer mellowed into fall, and fall gave way to winter, completing the cycle of seasons that marked their first year of marriage. The Rocking G prospered under their joint stewardship, Owen's cattle operation expanding with the purchase of premium breeding stock, while Gracie established a productive kitchen garden and even began a small poultry business that brought additional income. They divided their time between the main house and the cabin, which they continued to improve together, making it a true retreat. On warm evenings, they often rode to the ridge to watch the sunset, the same spot where Owen had proposed, now forever special to them both. When the snows of their second winter melted away, Gracie shared news that brought tears of joy to Owen's eyes. They would welcome a child before the year's end. Throughout her pregnancy, Owen treated her with tender solicitude that occasionally made her laugh. "I'm having a baby, not turning into porcelain," she teased as he insisted on doing the heavier kitchen work. "You're carrying our future," he replied, kissing her growing belly. "I'm allowed to fuss." Their daughter, Elizabeth Daniel Grayson, was born on a crisp October day in 1878, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. As Gracie held her newborn while Owen sat beside them on the bed, his arm protectively around them both, she felt a circle completing, from broken to whole, from lost to found, from alone to beloved. "She's perfect," Owen whispered, touching their daughter's tiny hand with reverent wonder. "She is," Gracie agreed. "And so is this life we've built." 2 years later, Elizabeth was joined by a brother, Samuel James, completing their family. The Rocking G continued to thrive, becoming known throughout the territory for its quality cattle and the generous hospitality of its owners. Occasionally, Gracie and Owen would visit Willow Creek, now without the shadows of the past hanging over them. The auction block that had once been the site of Gracie's greatest humiliation had been dismantled years ago, replaced by a small gazebo where town concerts were held in summer. On one such visit, as they walked through town with Elizabeth skipping ahead and Samuel secure in Owen's arms, they encountered an elderly woman who studied Gracie intently before approaching. "You're Thomas Erickson's girl, aren't you?" she asked. "The one he jilted when your daddy got in trouble." Before Gracie could respond, Owen shifted Samuel to one arm and placed his other hand protectively at the small of her back. "This is my wife, Gracie Grayson," he corrected firmly. The woman looked between them, noting their fine clothes, healthy children, and the obvious affection that connected them. "Well," she said finally, "seems things worked out for the best after all." "They certainly did," Gracie agreed, smiling up at Owen. "Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need, even when it doesn't look like what you thought you wanted." That evening, as they prepared for the journey back to the ranch, Owen found Gracie standing at the edge of town, looking out toward the distant silhouette of the rocking G on the horizon. "Ready to go home?" he asked, joining her. Gracie leaned into his embrace, thinking of all that awaited them, their children, their land, the life they'd built together from such unlikely beginnings. "I am," she said, her heart full of gratitude for the man who had seen her worth when others saw only her misfortune. "I always am,"